Hello and welcome to another episode of Webb's Religion Podcast. Today we're with Joedi Duggan talking about Jehovah's Witnesses. She worked with my stepmom for a while, so I don't really know her, but I know people who know her. So let's get started.
Okay.
What is it that makes the Jehovah's Witnesses so attractive to you in particular?
Well, I have always had a spiritual interest and been looking for answers. I was raised Catholic, went to several years of Catholic school, and was always told, just have faith. It's just a matter of faith.
Mhm.
But I have always been one who wants to know why. And so I was looking for satisfying answers to spiritual questions. When I started looking, I found that there are answers to questions like, what is God's purpose for the earth? What happens when we die? And those things can be answered from the Bible. I think the first thing that really struck me was Psalms 83:18, where it says that people may know that you, whose name is Jehovah, you alone are most high over all the earth. So finding out that God has a name and that he is a real person that I could draw close to, that was very appealing to me.
So you do believe in an afterlife. You have mentioned what happens after you die.
Well, not exactly an afterlife. We believe, as the Bible teaches, that there will be a resurrection, and some will be resurrected to heaven and some will be resurrected to the earth. The Bible talks about 8 different people who were resurrected, and all of them were resurrected to the earth. They were young and old, men and women. Some had been dead a very short time, and one was dead for 4 days. Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days, and yet Jesus was able to resurrect him to perfect health without any kind of problems. So not exactly an afterlife, but definitely believe that God is going to resurrect us.
Okay. What misconceptions do you feel people have about Jehovah's Witnesses?
I think a lot of people think that because we are called Jehovah's Witnesses, that we aren't a Christian religion. And we absolutely are a Christian religion because we know that Jesus is the key to the outworking of God's purpose. And if it weren't for his ransom sacrifice, then none of us would have an opportunity for everlasting life.
Very interesting. Next question is, does your religion have any holy books? And it's already answered by the fact you're holding a Bible right now. So you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. That was one of the things that really drew me, was the fact that we were always looking to God's word for answers. It wasn't any tradition of men. It was the scriptures and what God has to say about the subject. And the Bible talks about it being God's thoughts. So rather than being different individual men who wrote the Bible, it is God's thoughts penned by different men. Sort of like if a lawyer were to dictate a letter to his secretary, it may be the secretary who actually wrote it down, but it was the lawyer's thoughts that went into the letter. So we believe that the entire Bible is inspired of God and beneficial for any problem we may come up against.
Can you give an overview of your religion's history?
So many people don't necessarily think that this was a religion. They think it's a relatively new religion. And Jehovah's Witnesses have actually been on the earth since Abel. So there have always been ones who want to serve Jehovah and want to do it in a way that brings honor and glory to his name. Jesus himself talked about preaching and teaching, and he used the scriptures to answer questions. So we always look to the Bible for answers. And if you look at Hebrews 11, the entire chapter talks about ones who were faithful, and it goes all the way from faithful Abel
Mm.
to Abraham, Moses, those in the early Christian congregation who were persecuted for preaching about Jesus, and all of those are witnesses of Jehovah. So even though we adopted the name Jehovah's Witnesses in the 30s, there have always been and will always be Jehovah's Witnesses on the earth.
I see. How does the theology of Jehovah's Witness differ from a more typical Christian theology?
Well, I think the fact that everything adheres strictly to the Bible is different than most. We don't follow the traditions of men, which sometimes makes us stand out as different.
Mhm.
The fact that we follow the example of the early Christian congregation, there are no paid clergy, there are no one that forces you to do anything. Everything is done of your own free will and because you learn from the Bible what pleases Jehovah.
Mm. Who or what plays the largest part of a religion?
Well, absolutely Jehovah, God himself, and his son Jesus. But I think that the biggest thing that you will find in Jehovah's Witnesses is the fact that we go preaching door to door. And anywhere in the world that you go, you're going to find Jehovah's Witnesses doing the same thing here that they do in Mexico or in China, or we're actually in over 200 lands. I can't remember the exact number.
Oh, wow.
But the goal is to preach to all the nations. And anywhere you live, that's exactly what Jehovah's Witnesses do, is preach about God's kingdom and how it will solve the problems of mankind.
Very interesting. So you touched on preaching. What else does Jehovah's Witnesses require of you as a devotee?
Well, actually, that's not something that is required of anybody.
Mhm.
It is something that we choose to do in imitation of Jesus. He himself taught his 12 apostles to go preaching from door to door, from village to village, trying to find those who were right-hearted. And so we just follow that same example. The early Christian congregation did that, and even down to today, we do the exact same thing. That's actually where I was this morning.
Oh, wow. So now, if you had to choose any religion other than Jehovah's Witnesses, which would you follow and why?
You know, I thought that was the most interesting of all the questions that you thought to ask. And in all honesty, there is no other religion that I would choose to follow. The story of Jesus talking to a crowd, and they didn't like what he said, so they all went away.
Mhm.
And he then asked a question of his apostles, and Peter said, "But who would we go away to?" There is nothing better than the truth. And I think you would find any Jehovah's Witness that you meet would say the same thing, that you can't choose something else because the truth is from God.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.